Well, we'll try this again and get a recording going of today's class. With this class, there are several things I want to cover, and so let's jump into that. I'm going to share my screen, and we will put up today's topics. So today, we're going to be talking about diaphragm carburetors. We're going to be talking about two-stroke case leaks, and I hope to do a demonstration on that. We'll be talking about governors and wrap up with a quick intro on ignition and electrical systems. There's lots of stuff to cover, which should kind of feed into some of the things we were doing last week. I hope this information helps you guys move forward in your class, and for everybody else out on the web, hopefully it will give them some answers to maybe some of the small engine problems that they're having. So let's jump in to some of these things. Diaphragm carburetors, like this one that I'm holding in my hand here. Diaphragm carburetors are commonly found on small two-stroke cycle engines. And so that would be your chainsaws, your string trimmers, or weed eaters, as folks commonly call them. I used to race go-karts, and we used diaphragm carburetors on those quite a bit. And I think one of the important things to realize is that this carburetor looks differently because, one, there's no float bowl on this carburetor. What does that allow you to do without the float bowl? It allows you to operate the carburetor at any angle. So that's super important. Something like a chainsaw where you're going to be operating it maybe upside down or horizontal or, just all kinds of different directions. That's a necessity. The other thing is that the fuel pump is integral with the carburetor. So these diaphragms down here in this picture are three different examples of fuel pumper diaphragms you would find in a diaphragm style carburetor. So that's another unique thing. This is not just a carburetor, it's a fuel pump in a carburetor all in one unit. And lastly, it's got diaphragms on both sides. One diaphragm on one side is your fuel pump diaphragm, if you will. And then on the other side, we're going to have our metering diaphragm. The metering diaphragm is the one that takes the place of the float. So super important. Now, I have here in the text that these carburetors are really affected by alcohol. Why are they so affected by alcohol? Because the alcohol in the fuels destroys these diaphragms. And so the most common problem you're going to have with an engine like this is that you're going to have the diaphragms go bad over time, in addition to the carburetor just getting gummed up with fuel and debris and stuff. So 4 or 5 year lifespan on these before they need to be cleaned. The diaphragms need to be replaced, or the carburetor needs to be replaced. It's pretty common these days with the amount of alcohol we have in our fuel. So if you've done your still training online, you've participated in our other class activities, you've seen these carburetors now, maybe you have one at home. One of the tips is they say, hey, don't try to clean this carburetor out with carburetor cleaner. Why? That destroys the diaphragms. Use brake cleaner on it. So one of our tech tips of the day is use brake cleaner on this style of carburetor if you are cleaning it out. However, if you are cleaning it out, maybe a better way to go would be to, let me move forward one slide, would be to use an ultrasonic cleaner. And so I have on this slide here, the ultrasonic cleaner, this guy right here, this is your friend. If you could throw the whole carburetor in there and clean it out, Does a great job. One of the most effective tools we have for cleaning small engine carburetors, and I've made other videos on that. The other thing I have here on this particular slide, as you can see, well, good way to fix one of these carburetors besides cleaning them is a new gasket set or diaphragm set. So here is, we got a new spring, float, needle, pin, fuel filter screen that goes inside the carburetor. Those commonly get clogged up, and of course new diaphragms cost us about $9. Sometimes it's just easier and cheaper maybe to replace the whole carb. There's an entire carburetor with an air filter, with the spark plug, all this stuff for $12. Seems a little hard to believe, but you can get these pretty economically sometimes. So, you know, it's not surprising to see one of these where you can get it for less than $30. And that might be a good way to go to fix your problems. One of the most common problem areas is the diaphragms in the carburetor failing and the carburetor getting clogged up. So carburetor problems are a big deal on all of our small engines. This might be the easiest way to fix it. Now, if I clear out these drawings and I go back a slide here, this one says, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on in a very small package here. So on the top side here, we see our fuel pump diaphragm here. And what it does is it has a pulse line. So this line goes to the crankcase. So let's get our text tool up there. So if that line were to become disconnected, it's like the engine would essentially run out of fuel, because we're relying on the crankcase, the piston moving up and down in the cylinder to create pressure changes in the crankcase. Those pressure changes cause this diaphragm to flex back and forth, and that's what causes it to draw the fuel up from the gas tank up into the carburetor. Obviously, if there's any vacuum leaks in the fuel lines or fittings or anything like that, that's going to affect the way this fuel pump works. It's not like it's a super strong pump. It's just a little diaphragm in there. So it doesn't take much to throw this assembly off. So always check and make sure your fuel lines and stuff are nice and fresh. Like the diaphragms, the fuel lines and filters and stuff will age as well, get deteriorated by the gas, and end up failing on you. So we have our fuel pump, and I want to point out one other thing. If I clear out those drawings, I want to point out this right here. That is a little inlet screen. It's like a secondary fuel filter. I will see people that they change the external fuel filter and they forget to change that one, and that's why their engine's not running correctly. It goes from there, from one side of the carburetor all the way to the other side of the carburetor to our metering diaphragm. Again, this takes the place of the float, and that kind of that float level, so to speak, is a balance between atmospheric pressure on the outside of this diaphragm here and spring tension on the inside. And the balance point between those two keeps this inner chamber full of fuel so it can be discharged out of the main metering system and idle circuits, etc. What I like about these carburetors is they usually have good provisions for mixture adjustment with both low speed and high speed mixture adjustments on them. This carburetor I have in my hand has a big T-handle on the low speed adjustment. So lot in a small package. The mixture screws need to be adjusted right, but the biggest problem that you will likely encounter is that the carburetor gets gummed up and that it has diaphragm failure on it, usually after 4 or 5 years of use, due to the alcohol content we have in our fuels these days, which averages around 10%, especially here in California where we are at. All right, we'll clear out those drawings. We'll keep this going right along. So again, replace the diaphragms, clean the carburetors, or just replace the whole carburetor. You guys figure out which is the best method for you. Now, there's something else on two-stroke cycle engines that is particular that I want to point out to you, and that is case leaks. Where a case leak on a four-stroke cycle engine will usually just be end up being an oil leak on the engine. On a two-cycle engine, this results in a lean mixture. Why? Well, imagine I have a case leak, I'm going to say right down here. What that's going to allow to happen is air from the outside to be drawn into the bottom of the crankcase. Now, don't forget, our air-fuel mixture goes in the intake port. It gets pushed down here on that kind of that intake stroke. It gets drawn in as the piston moves up. As the piston pushes down, it goes around here. It goes through the transfer port. That's how it gets on top of the piston. So the whole crankcase on a two-cycle engine, the whole crankcase is essentially like your intake manifold, if you will, if you compare this to a four-cycle engine or an automotive engine. And so what does that mean? That means that if I have a case leak, it's going to really lean out the air-fuel mixture. And of course, two-cycle engines are really affected by lean air-fuel mixtures. If I lean it out, not only do I reduce the amount of gas going into the engine, but I'm also reducing my lubrication. So it's kind of a double negative. It makes the engine run hotter, and I'm reducing lubrication. So how do I diagnose these? By pressure and vacuum testing. So let me clear out these drawings real quick. If I were to tap on here and I were to put a vacuum, and I like to start with the vacuum, and if it doesn't hold vacuum, I'll move over to pressure. So let's say it doesn't hold vacuum. I start applying some pressure inside here. I can then diagnose this like a leaky tire, right? A tire that you ran over a nail in. You want to find where that nail's at. You spray that tire down with soapy water, and you see where the bubbles are coming from. So if I pressurize the crankcase, which I'm drawing in pink here, it's under pressure, and then I were to spray, soapy water on the outside, wherever I had bubbles coming out here, that would indicate where my case leak was. So this is really good for the two-cycle engine that, you've gone through the carburetor, maybe you've replaced it, maybe you rebuilt it, it still doesn't run right. Maybe you can get it started up by using the primer bowl, but it doesn't run well after that, or you always have to throttle it to keep it running. It wants to stall. You're probably fighting a case leak. Now remember that your typical two-cycle engine, of course, that engine is covered. If it's like for a string trimmer or a chainsaw, there's a bunch of plastic covers and stuff in the way covering all this stuff. This engine that I have in my hand right now, I've removed all those plastic covers so that we could see the case leaks and how they happen. And to show you that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my screen share to the screen. And then I'm going to get out of this presentation. I think. And we're going to minimize a bunch of stuff. So minimize, minimize, minimize. And we're going to open up our document camera. And it's thinking about it. The camera shut off, but we're turning it back on. Yep. Nope, I don't want to do that. Okay. We'll stop the screen share real quick. So I have this engine right here. I'm going to get my document camera going. Now this is a string trimmer engine, and I've put some I've taken off the plastics and I have done a few adjustments to it. See if I can get my camera working. It seems like it's having a hard time. So get this engine sat down. We get our camera back up. There it goes. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to get my screen share going again, where it's just my screen. Okay, let's get our camera going. So here we go. And we're looking at this little engine right here. Here's the exhaust. Here's the intake where the carburetor would go. I've taken the carburetor off and I put an adapter I have here, but you could put a rubber plug in there. You just need a way to put pressure in the engine. Notice I have the spark plug in here, and I took a piece of rubber and I stuck that underneath the exhaust and bolted the exhaust back on. So the exhaust port now is plugged. The intake is plugged. The spark plug's in. This engine is all sealed up. This engine's all sealed up at this point. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my pressure tester. So what is that pressure tester? Well, it's this tool right here. We'll get it on the screen. Actually, I was in a panic. I started class late today because I was looking for a pressure tester. I couldn't find my normal small engine one. I've taken my radiator pressure tester and I'm going to adapt that and put it on this engine. So the vacuum line goes on. And now I'm going to apply just a few PSI of pressure. So that's 5 PSI. I'm not going to go over that. What you can see is that this engine doesn't hold any pressure. Now, if I kept pressurizing it to 10, even a good engine, I could blow out the crank seals and stuff. So what you can see is that, hey, this thing doesn't hold pressure at all. And again, first you would start with vacuum, and then you would go for pressure. And I also want to point out that, you know, a 2-cycle engine, it's got 2 case halves here. Right? One there, one there. They're bolted together. There's some type of RTV silicone sealer here between the case halves typically. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some soapy water, and to make sure I didn't make a huge mess on my on my desktop here, I took some soapy water solution. I'm putting it on a brush and I'm putting it on my engine. But the other thing you could do is just hose the thing down. So you can see if I brush this, it does make some soap suds there. So now I'm going to pressurize this engine here. Hopefully we'll be able to find that case leak. Oh, there it is on that side. This was an engine that I had that, again, you could start it up using the primer, but then it would die. It would die out. You just couldn't, you could kind of adjust the carburetor, but you could never adjust it and get it to run super good. Can you see those bubbles coming out right there? Okay, it looks like we got Tim with us. So if I pressurize this crankcase, you can see that it has bubbles just coming out from the bottom. So this is a good example of a case leak on a small 2-cycle engine, and I'm finding it by a pressure test. So there's my pressure tester. It won't hold pressure. And again, I put soapy water on the engine, and it's just like finding a leak in a tire. You're looking for where the soap bubbles come out. So in order to fix this engine, you'd have to take it all apart. You'd have to reseal it, put it all back together. That made this engine end up in my kind of example bin of stuff, because at the time we decided it wasn't worth the teardown. This engine had also been dropped. So 2-cycle case leaks, if I switch this thing back now to my presentation, which is right, it's right here. Anyways, if I switch this back to my presentation, and I go back a little bit, they're a big deal. They will make the engine run lean. And I get my annotation tools on there, a lean running engine, and end up doing some major damage, because if it runs too lean, I can end up burning a hole right in my piston top. That's a big deal on 2-cycle engines, because your fuel also contains your lubrication, right? Now, there is a couple idiosyncrasies to case leaks that are kind of weird. For example, if you have a 2-stroke motorcycle and it develops a case leak, it could have a case leak that's going inside the transmission. And so even I myself, I own an old motorcycle right now that I used to vintage race. And right now it smokes really bad. And what it's doing is, because the main seals are worn, essentially they're creating a case leak. And that's another good point, is that the main seals themselves around the crankshaft area, that's something else I want to spray with soapy water and try to find that leak there. The main seals on this bike are essentially the leak, and they're allowing oil to suck in from the transmission and be burned in the engine. And so what I found is I couldn't get the bike to stop smoking. I put less oil in the 2-stroke mix, and I kept less oil, and it's still smoking really heavily. And then I checked the transmission fluid, and the transmission fluid's low. Oh, it's sucking in the oil from the transmission. So kind of a weird deal that you would find only in that type of application, where you have a transmission bolted to the bottom of your case of your 2-cycle, but it's the same deal. It's a case leak. All right, so moving right along, we'll get rid of the drawings. Now we're going to talk about mechanical. Well, we're going to talk about governors, and then we'll switch back to this with mechanical governors. So let's do this. Let's go to the Briggs & Stratton governor presentation that I made the video on for a previous class. Hopefully you guys watched it last week. I just wanted to get that, hey, there's 3 types of governors, right? There's pneumatic governors, which means they use air. So this is a pneumatic governor. That's a pneumatic governor. It's the simplest type of governor, super basic. The fins on the flywheel move a little air blade, and it's super cheap and easy. This, works okay. If your air inlet gets clogged, you get a bunch of grass and stuff in here, the engine tends to over rev, and then it runs hot, and it can self-destruct from there. So it's not the best, but it's super simple, and it does get the job done and works okay, as long as the governor blade here is free to move. As long as this is free to move, and there's not a bunch of leaves and debris stuck inside the flywheel or the covers of the engine. Okay, so there's pneumatic. The second type of governor, and the most popular governor, is our mechanical governors, like this one right here. And that's what we're going to talk about the most. Okay, but there is also an electric governor or electronic. So 3 types of governors. This is one of the test questions: pneumatic, electronic, and mechanical. Of those 3, mechanical by and far is the most common. There's also questions that talk about governor droop. Governor droop is the difference between your top no load speed and basically like your under load speed, your maximum torque RPM, and usually it's going to be, you know, right where the engine makes the peak, its peak torque output. So your top no load speed might be, in this image, it's 3,600 RPM, but it makes the most torque at 32 or 3,100. And so that's how much the engine RPM would bog down as you put the engine under load accordingly. So governor droop, top no load speed are a couple of terms we just introduced. We're going to hit those more as we talk about our mechanical governors, but I wanted to get to that we have three types of governors. We have our electronic, which would be on high-end engines. We have our pneumatic, which would be on low-end engines. And then everything in between is going to be on mechanical. So let's switch back to this other presentation. I made this special just for you guys today because I wanted you to, I wanted to give you just something different and really kind of drive some points home. So a mechanical governor, if I can get my tools working correctly here. A mechanical governor, by far, is the most common governor out there. Your first step in adjusting it, troubleshooting it, anything like that, is going to be knowing all the parts. So this picture here is a great way to do just that and learn all these different parts of the governor. What's difficult is that sometimes the names change depending upon the service information you're looking at, and that sometimes can drive you nuts. But if you know the parts of this diagram and the concepts of how they work, you should from there be able to kind of figure things out and get your adjustments and stuff done. So we have things like the governor cup, the governor gear. You know what's not on this diagram? Well, it's on it, but they haven't labeled it, is I got these two things right here that move out. What are those things? Those are my flyweights. Those are my flyweights. Those sense the speed. Centrifugal forces will cause those guys to fly out. And what they will do is they will move the governor cup out. He then in turn touches the governor shaft. The governor shaft moves the governor lever arm. He ends up working the throttle linkage there. Okay, so take time, study these pictures, learn the names of the parts. Super important. I think for learning how to fix anything is learning your lay of the land, right? It's like, you know, trying to go somewhere and you don't know the roads, right? If I want to fix something, I have to know the names of the parts, and then I have to know how do these parts work together. So this is a good picture that kind of shows you how stuff is put together. It's still kind of hard to visualize, especially though when you get on a real engine. So here I'm working on a Honda clone. And as far as the governor, this is what I can see on the outside of the engine. I can see, if I go back a slide, right? This is our governor lever arm. I can see that, and I can see the shaft that runs in the center of the governor gear. So we'll go forward. So what do I have here? Well, I have my governor lever arm right here. There's my throttle linkage going over to my carburetor. Here's the shaft that goes right in the center of that governor cup that spins around inside the motor. So I can see that part from the outside. And the other thing is I can see that there's a shaft that runs on the inside of the motor, running from the inside to the outside. Well, what is that? If I go back a slide, oh, that is my governor shaft. So if I go back here, I can see my governor shaft. I can see my governor lever arm. Here's my throttle linkage. That little screw and jam nut. I'll put this in a different color. This little bolt, kind of like pinch clamp deal right there, that is what I would loosen and then later retighten if I'm doing my static adjustment. But I can't see all the good stuff on the inside from the outside. I just have to kind of be able to visualize that stuff on the inside and how it works. And I think that's part of what makes this difficult and how most people don't really understand what's going on. So again, if I clear out these drawings and we go back, you have all this stuff here on the inside that you can't see, that you're basically speed sensing components. And then on the outside, you have your throttle control parts, right? And from there, when you look at an engine on the outside, you're really just seeing mostly the throttle control parts. You can't see the stuff on the inside. But it's important to understand how it works. So we put this together to kind of break this down on how the governor really works on the inside. So again, here is my outside the engine throttle sensing stuff. And this over here is my inside of the engine speed sensing stuff. So here's my governor cup. Right there and right there is the flyweights. This gear interfaces with the gear on the crankshaft. It could also be on the camshaft. But basically, as the engine is spinning, it's spinning that gear, which will then cause the flyweights to move out. So this is my speed sensing device. I'll type down here, speed sensor. Because essentially, that's what this thing is. All right. So with that stuff on the mechanical governor, if I start up the engine and I get it running, so the flyweights will sense the speed and stuff will happen. So we'll clear up these drawings and let me get my mouse going. All right. So here we go. All right. So if your engine was just sitting there, one thing you'll notice in this image, change the color here too, is that the throttle blade is wide open. The spring holds the throttle wide open. If your engine is sitting and it's off, the governor is not spinning, this throttle is wide open on your engine. You pull the rope, right? You fire up your engine, you get it running. And when that happens, then this assembly here at the bottom starts turning. So this guy starts spinning. As he starts spinning, the flyweights begin to move out. As the flyweights begin to move out, the governor cup ends up pressing on the governor lever that's inside the engine. That lever then feeds outside the engine, where it can then work this lever arm on the outside here and ultimately start closing the throttle. So it's the speed sensing or mechanics of the governor. It's this stuff that is combating the spring on the other side. So it's this stuff versus the spring. The spring wants to hold it at wide open throttle. It's the flyweights and the mechanics inside the speed sensing device that is going to fight that and close the throttle against the tension of the spring. So if the engine gets higher and higher in RPM, it gets to what we would call its top no load speed or its top RPM. What is going to happen? See if I can get it going here. Is the flyweights fly out all the way. And what I have done here is really started to close down that throttle. The plunger moved out, the flyweights are all the way out. And this thing is pinching off the throttle to keep the engine from over revving. So the governor acts as like your top speed control, right? Your RPM limiter. And that's how most people think about it. They think, oh, it's going to take power away because it's limiting my RPM. Yes, it does do that. It keeps the engine from blowing itself to bits and over revving, but it also allows that thing when it gets loaded down to open up the throttle all the way. And so that is why we like to say, if I can go back a few slides here. Oh, I thought I had it in here somewhere. It's like cruise control. I must have taken out that picture. Your governor on your engine is essentially like cruise control. When the car hit, if you got your cruise control set to 65 and you hit a hill, it's going to automatically open up that throttle. Let's get it back to opening up the throttle. There's my throttle out wide open. So it's going to open up that throttle. When you're going down the hill, your cruise control would close the throttle. And that's what the governor is going to do. It's going to allow the throttle to open when the engine gets bogged down, and it's going to close it to keep it from over revving. So a good analogy of it is that cruise control on a car. So let's go back to the adjustments then, because I see these things, they're misadjusted all the time. The first adjustment you want to do is the static adjustment. Most important adjustment to do. It's the first adjustment you need to do. And what the heck are you doing? What you're doing is you're taking this clearance. You don't need any clearance between the governor cup and the governor shaft inside the engine. If there's any clearance between these two, and the flyweights are allowed to move back and forth, and that governor cup's not touching anything, the governor's not going to work correctly. Let me clear those out and show you what I mean. So this whole mechanical governor relies on that there is no clearance between those two components. If there is any clearance here, what happens is the plunger starts moving back and forth, but he's not touching this arm. And so the spring just holds the throttle wide open. I'll over rev the engine. Or I'll have an engine that revs up really high, then the throttle closes, then it revs up really high again, because you have all this play, all this slop in the adjustment. So what are you doing on a static adjustment? What I am basically doing is there is a pinch bolt right here, and I'm going to be loosening that pinch bolt, moving this thing over to push this lever right up against that governor cup and taking any play out of this assembly. That's what I'm doing. But on this image, as I've drawn it, I would turn this thing clockwise to do that. On other governors, I might turn it counterclockwise. So when you read the procedures, it can be kind of confusing, but basically what you're trying to do is take that play out of the governor, and that's inside the engine, so it's hard to understand because you can't see it, right? It's in the motor. We'll clear those out of there. Boom. All right, here we go. So the first adjustment we do is the top no load speed. I'm sorry. The first adjustment we do, let's start that over, is the static adjustment. We then might do a governed idle adjustment. We will then wrap things up with our top no load speed adjustment. And so what you're looking at on this table here is various spots where you can put your governor spring. And this is not just any hardware store spring. This is a spring that its tension has been calibrated to be a certain amount. If you have doubt that the spring's been like bent or modified, somebody put the pliers on there, get a new governor spring. Don't just go to the hardware store to get one. You actually get one from your dealer, from your small engine shop. So you get the right thing with the right amount of tension. Because remember, the tension of the spring, that opens the throttle, right? The mechanics are what close the throttle. And so you can see as I move the spring to different positions and I apply more and more tension, it moves up my top no load speed here. So that is pretty important. So with that, you know, it's not like my engine's going to make more power if I just rev it up more. And I think that's what people do all the time. They think, oh man, my engine's bogging down. I'm just going to add a bunch more spring tension. I've seen people take this spring out and stretch it all out to really rev the engine up 4,000, 4,500 RPM, thinking that's going to fix the problem, and it ends up blowing up their engine. All right, let's clear those out of there. So it's static first, governed idle if you have a governed idle, and then your top no load speed, which is set by the tension of the spring, which usually is related to the position of the spring. Moving right along. So what about governor droop again? Well, governor droop, it's really the difference between your top no load speed and kind of like the max torque output of the engine. And that gets us into torque and horsepower. Now, this is not for a small engine. Look at that, 350 horsepower. This is an automotive graph, but you know, an engine's an engine. You could say this, instead of 348 horsepower, think of it, it's 3.48 horsepower, right? Maybe it's a 3.5 horsepower Briggs. Basically, what I want to show you is in red, and I'll change this. In red here, we have our horsepower. He keeps going up to a higher RPM. My top no load speed is going to be like kind of my safe higher RPM level. So let's say that's right there. And we're going to drop these all down by a few. So let's say that's 4,000 RPM. And this is 3,000 RPM, 2,000. That makes it more of a small engine appropriate level. My max torque that my engine makes, we're going to say on this engine is somewhere right below maybe 2,800 RPM, right below 3,000. The governor droop would be the difference between these two things. Simply meaning, like, here's this guy, he's mowing his grass. If I went from the short grass into the deep grass, right, here I have no load on the engine, so it's at top no load speed. Or especially if I'm on the concrete over here, right, it's at top no load speed. I push it into the grass and whoa, it bogs down, right? That bog is governor droop. Now, as the RPM bogs down, remember, the spring is going to open up the throttle to wide open. So once I get to wide open throttle and my engine is under load, I should be at my peak torque output point and making the most amount of torque that my engine can make, and which would allow me to cut the grass. However, what I want to point out from this slide is that the engine only makes so much power. So if I'm overworking the engine like this guy is here, and I'm cutting really tall grass or something, right, it's going to bog down the engine more, right? If I have a small little engine like in my Miata, I can't put the cruise control at 70 and just climb the Newcastle grade in 5th gear and expect it to hold 70 miles an hour. It just doesn't make enough power to do so. So it starts bogging down. So I think a lot of times people perceive a governor issue, and really maybe they're just asking too much for the engine. They need an engine that makes, 8 horsepower, not 5 horsepower, to do the job that they're trying to do. So that's not necessarily a fault of the governor. So the difference between that top no load speed and its wide open throttle under load speed, it's governed, that's the governor droop. And they try to keep that governor droop within 200-300 RPM for most applications. For something like a generator, that governor droop is kept much tighter because that generator has to generate electricity with the right amount of cycles per second. So what you'll find is that engines for generators have a much more sensitive governor, and they have much less governor droop. They keep that speed dialed in. Something for a lawnmower is going to allow 200, 300, maybe 400 RPM governor droop. It's going to have a wider range. All right. So we'll clear those drawings out of there. And we got to see a little bit of horsepower and torque. Torque is the twisting or turning effort of the crankshaft, is how I like to think about it. It's measured in foot-pounds. Okay, so torque is measured in foot-pounds. Horsepower is really the rate at which a horse could work, or think of it at the rate I'm getting work done. And one's calculated off of the other. So horsepower actually, I'm going to throw the formula up here just to show you guys how these things are related. Horsepower, it equals the torque multiplied by the RPM. But that's divided by 52. So horsepower equals torque divided by RPM by 52. So if you actually run something on a dyno, whether it's a small engine dyno, something else, it's running this formula. It's measuring the torque at the crankshaft or at the wheels. It's measuring the speed of the engine, its revolutions per minute of the crankshaft. And then it does those along with measuring time. And from that, it's going to calculate what the horsepower is. So they are related. And you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, torque here is going down, but the horsepower keeps going up. Why does horsepower keep going up? Horsepower keeps going up because the RPM's continuing to go up. So horsepower keeps going up. But then I get over here, and now the torque's dropped so far down that even if the RPM wants to keep going up, horsepower output starts falling off because the torque now is so low. And remember, horsepower is a calculation of both torque and RPM. So anyways, that's why those graphs read the way they do. So we threw in a little bonus for you today on torque and horsepower. And I teach engine tuning classes and stuff, and we spend just all semester focusing in on these things. So to kind of wrap things up on governors here, the governors often misadjusted. Why? Because really the person has a carburation issue. They don't understand that. They see a spring there and they start messing around with it. They don't understand how it works. Now, let me give you an example. Here we have a carburetor here, and I'm going to highlight here in green. This is my idle circuit, right? Here's my idle air bleed. Here's my idle discharge port, transfer ports. That's going to tap in over here to the float bowl. So if my idle circuits were clogged up, okay, the engine would not run well at low speeds, but once I got on main metering, it would run okay. You can see in the yellow here, fuel coming up the main metering circuit. So this happens all the time. The idle circuits are restricted or partially restricted. Main metering works okay. So the engine runs poorly and it ends up with a surge. The engine starts to die. The spring allows the throttle to open all the way. The throttle opens all the way. The main metering gives the engine a big shot of fuel and air. The engine picks up. Then the speed increases. The governor sees that. It starts to close off the throttle. Instead of being able to do a smooth transition, you start to close the throttle and it starts to choke off fuel flow because the passages are here clogged, and it starts to die again. So the spring opens up the throttle again, and you get this surge. So if you have a surge, it's usually a carburation issue, and that's usually restricted idle passages, to be honest with you. But people don't understand that, and what do? They just start jacking up the governor system, putting a bunch of extra tension on the spring to kind of keep that thing up on the main metering circuit to compensate, and then eventually the engine starts blowing up or something because they're over revving. So if you have a surge issue, clean the carburetor. Also check for vacuum leaks before you start jacking around with governor adjustments. Remember, if you're going to do a governor adjustment, the first thing to do would be to check that static adjustment. Make sure that there's no slop in there. Then you can fine tune the governor from there. But none of that works well unless you have a well-working carburetor that's cleaned out, that has no vacuum. So hopefully that helped put the concept of governors together for you guys. I know for me, switching over from just like building small engines for like mini bikes and go-karts and stuff and modifying stuff, especially working in the small engine industry, like for outdoor power equipment, I struggle with governors because normally I would just take governors off the engines. And when you want the governor to work properly, that's a totally different operation, right? So a lot of it, though, comes down to carburation issues that are perceived as governor issues. So don't jack with this spring until you know you have a good working carburetor. All right. So hopefully that makes sense now, as you can see how the mechanics inside there work a little bit more. All right. So with that, hopefully we answered some questions. We talked about governor, droop, that type of thing. But I still feel like I have not done a good justice to really doing the static adjustment and all the governor adjustments. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to change my screen share, and I'm going to go to the internet. So there we are. And I have switched over to the Briggs & Stratton Power Portal. And I want you guys to realize, like, if I click the Briggs & Stratton image there, it's thinking about it, I can go right here and I can pick up any repair manual that I'm looking for on a Briggs product. So I put single cylinder L head here, boom, I can pull up that manual and download it. Now I've already downloaded those. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to minimize that. And I'm going to open up, I looked at the single cylinder overhead valve engine. That's okay, that'll work. We will just share our regular screen at this moment. All right, there we go. And so what you can see is I put up my search tool. Now, if I'm at the front of the manual, if I hit Control F, I can type in what I want. I typed in the word static adjustment, find it, boom, it took me right there. So I mean, I'm kind of an old school guy. I like flipping through a manual, but the cool thing about a PDF manual is you can Control F your way through things. You can find what you're looking for by using that search engine. So it took me to the adjustments. So I'm going to close that out of there. So governor adjustment, let's zoom in on this thing a little bit. Instead of hitting find, I'm going to, that didn't really help me, did it? Nope, not like that. Oh, that's a little bit more zoomed in. There we go. There's my zoom. All right. So a complete governor system adjustment includes static adjustment, engine warm up, idle or governed idle adjustment, and top no load speed. What do I want to point out right here? The order in which they said to do stuff. There's a couple questions on the Briggs & Stratton Power Portal test that says, well, what's the order that you do stuff? So static adjustment, that's number one. Now I'm going to let the engine warm up, and I'm going to do my governed idle adjustment if I have a governed idle adjustment to do. Not all engines have that. And then I'm going to do, so that's two. And then my third one is my top no load speed. Okay. So static, governed idle, top no load speed. So we'll clear that out of there. There's one of your test questions. So let's start with the static. It says loosen the screw holding the governor lever to the governor crank, rotate from an idle position to wide open throttle. Now, this is a very cryptic way to tell you to do this. Because I don't know about you, but what I found is that students just want to say, well, tell me what way to turn this thing. Well, they can't tell you what way to turn it because every engine, every governor and stuff is different. So some guys, you're going to turn clockwise. You turn this little guy right here, which is the governor shaft. you would turn him clockwise, and on other ones, you'd turn him counterclockwise. So you either have to have a manual that was very, very specific to, on this particular engine, this serial number, you turn it this direction. On this engine, this serial number, you turn it this other direction. Or they say, basically, they're telling you, hey, figure it out for yourself. That's what they're having you do here. So what do they mean? They say, all right, while holding the linkage at wide open throttle, use the tool to rotate the governor shaft. Oh, wait a minute. Before I get to that, rotate the throttle linkage from idle to wide open. So I go from closed throttle to wide open throttle. And I look, what's the direction of the governor arm rotation? Basically, when I go from idle to wide open throttle, what way does this guy move? Does this guy move this way when I do that? Or does he move this way when I do that? And I note down that direction. So let's say I note down that, all right, when I go to idle to wide open throttle, I'm going this direction. That moves this little shaft here in the middle counterclockwise. Okay, I've noted that down. It's counterclockwise. CC. So now, while holding the linkage at wide open throttle, use the appropriate tool, a little wrench, some pliers, to rotate this thing until it stops, to rotate this governor lever. And let me get my little hand tool back up. Governor lever to the governor crank. Basically, rotate that little shaft on the inside counterclockwise until he stops and I've taken out the play. Then I can, see if I get my little drawing tool back up. Then I can tighten that screw back up and pinch that thing back into position, and I'm done. I've taken out that play on the inside. Okay, so you have to figure out which direction it goes. Does it turn counterclockwise or does it turn clockwise? Hold it at wide open throttle, rotate that thing its direction of rotation, and then tighten it back up. And it's only going to move like a quarter of a turn at most. It's usually like 1/8 of a turn total play on most of these things. So it doesn't move very far. You're taking up that little 1/4 inch of play on the inside of the motor is what you're doing with the static adjustment. We'll clear out those drawings. We'll put the hand tool back up. So now that we've done that, now we can go to some other adjustments. So let's see if I can find something with a governed idle adjustment. So now you've done the static, now you can start the engine, you can get it running, place the throttle on slow adjustment, and basically they're having you put a rod through this lever, lock it in, and you're bending a tang to get the governed idle adjustment to be correct on this particular engine. So it's a little tricky because I got fighting this PDF and that type of thing. But let's see, I'm going to so like this one goes right to top no load speed because it doesn't have governed idle. But there's a tang that you bend and you have the lever at the lowest position. Then you go to, if you're doing top no load speed, you put it all the way to the fast position. So I want to highlight that. So now I'm going to my fast position. And now on this particular one, I'm moving this bracket and rod here. Come on, thing. To get my top no load speed. And how do you find the top no load speed? There's going to be a chart that'll say 3,000 RPM or 4,000 RPM. So I got to be able to measure my RPM to do those other adjustments. Okay. So anyways, I wanted to point out in the manual, I think stuff in the manual is pretty straightforward once you get past the static adjustment. And the static adjustment is purposely written kind of vague because you need to figure out which way the stuff turns. All right. So with that, we'll clear out those drawings. We're going to close out that PDF. We're going to open the internet back up. And so you saw where I got that. Now I want to also go back to our still let's try this again. Nope, I have caps lock on. That's going to get you every time. I want to go back to our still website. The still website is also very good. In fact, if I go to Learner Home and I'm searching for something like we've been talking about carburetors, I'm going to put carb in there. And look at all the great stuff that I come up with here. Now, one of the trainings you're required to do is this Bronze 8 carburation training. Some of you guys have already done that, which is fantastic. But I wanted to point out there's some really cool videos here that are really, really good. So if you're working on these little diaphragm style carburetors, this is about the best information you're ever going to find on how to diagnose these carburetors, how to go through them step by step, diagnose what's wrong, clean them out, all that type of stuff. So I just wanted to show you how easy it was for me to find that. I went into my learning home, I typed in the word carb and I hit search.
What we'd like to show you now is an evaluation of a typical purge primer style carburetor.
And you have a 25-minute video there of how to work on and diagnose that carburetor. Really, really good resources. If you watch those and go through our stuff, you'll know more about these little diaphragm carburetors than most people in the industry. Definitely more than my other instructors at the college for sure. Most people don't really understand these things. So just you guys have great resources at your fingertips through our course here. All right. So again, I typed in the word carb. I was in my learning home and I came up with all those different videos there for us to check out. So, and they're adding new stuff all the time, which is really good. This engine check video is a really good one as well. It's good for diagnostics and stuff. And then if you're getting into, you want to know about fuel injection and stuff, this engine analyzer, look, they have a laptop hooked up to a electronically fuel injected 2-cycle engine. Pretty darn cool stuff. So anyways, really good resources at your fingertips. So let's wrap up today. And then with that, I want to talk a little bit about ignition systems. And so I'm going to switch this over to our last slide here, which is on spark plugs. And next week will be our very last Zoom class presentation. Next Wednesday, 10 o'clock, our very last one. We're going to really go into ignitions a little bit more in detail, talk about how do we make spark to get to the spark plug. We'll talk about the electrical systems and all that type of stuff. But today, what I want to say is that, hey, if you're diagnosing an engine problem, one of the things that you should just do as a matter of course, just an easy, quick fix, is to put a new spark plug in there. It's very common to have spark plug issues on small engines. Why? They run richer mixtures, and they tend to want to foul out their spark plug because of that. A 2-cycle engine, we know it's burning oil in with the fuel. So again, that's going to want to coat the spark plug electrodes. This is the electrodes. This part of the bottom of the spark plug. In fact, this part here is the ground electrode. And then the part that I'm going to label red right here, this is my center electrode. So it wants to coat the electrodes in carbon. That makes the spark plug foul out. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a spark, and I'm going to draw this bright and blue. I'm trying to get a nice bright blue spark to jump between the center electrode to the ground electrode. And by doing so, that spark ignites the air-fuel mixture that's under compression, because I'm on the compression stroke. It ignites the air-fuel mixture, gets it burning, and I start the combustion process. So I'm trying to get electricity to jump a gap, and electricity doesn't want to jump a gap. And I'll tell you, if this spark plug, if he's all brown and crusty, and basically if I have carbon on there that's coating these things, it's easier for the electricity to work its way through the carbon to basically, instead of jumping the gap, he'll just drive on that carbon and get from the center electrode to the ground electrode. He'll track through that carbon and it won't make a spark. And then the engine won't run. And it's, you know, your typical small engine only has one cylinder and one spark plug. So if that one spark plug fails, guess what? It doesn't run at all, right? Whereas an automotive engine, maybe you got, you know, 6, 8 cylinders there. Well, if one's not working, now the other cylinders are running. At least the engine starts running, and it runs with a misfire, and you can kind of figure it out from there. So spark plug, most common ignition problem, because they tend to want to foul out, because we run richer air-fuel mixtures, we run 2-cycle oil, we run in dirty, dusty environments. So, hey, try a fresh plug, okay? However, if you're throwing in a fresh plug, make sure that that plug is the correct heat range, and that's what this slide is all about. So let me clear out these scribbles. So when we talk about heat range, if we think about this spark plug, how is it cooled? Well, the spark plug is screwed into the cylinder head, and the heat from the spark plug then can then conduct out into the head, like is drawn in that picture right there. So the longer the center electrode is, the further the distance it has to travel before it can make its way to the cylinder head and be cooled. So a hot spark plug, like this one over here, you can see that center electrode is pretty long. A colder spark plug, like over here, it has a shorter center electrode, so it doesn't have to travel as far before it gets to the engine metal. So what would happen if I put too hot of a heat range in my spark plug? That can lead to detonation problems. That could lead to holes, or in this case, a divot in the piston as it started to eat away the metal of the piston. And basically lead to me melting down the motor if I put in too hot of a heat range of a plug in. If I put in too cold of a heat range of a plug, you know what's going to happen? It's probably going to run for a while, and then it's going to foul out. It's not going to be able to burn off the oil, fuel, carbon contamination on there, and the spark plug's going to quickly foul. So the manufacturers will choose a spark plug with the correct heat range based on what's the compression ratio of the engine, what temperature does the engine run at, what air-fuel ratios do they plan to run in that engine, and that's how they choose the right heat range. The heat range is woven into the part number of the spark plug, okay? So if I looked at NGK and I have a, let's say I have a B6 ES plug, and then I have a B7 ES plug, and the ES is like an extended nose on the center electrode. Anyways, if I look at the difference in the B6 and the B7, it's in the part number. The B6 is a hotter plug than the B7. A B8 or a B9 is an even colder plug than that B6 would be, or a B5 would be. So, you know, a lower performance engine is typically going to run a hotter plug. A higher performance engine is usually going to run a colder plug because it's making more heat from its own combustion process. Really important for you to choose the right spark plug heat range for the motor. Sometimes what I'll do, and this is kind of like our final tech tip of the day, is I'll cheat a little bit. What do I mean I'll cheat? Well, let me close this out and get my document camera going again. and move this engine out of the way here. Screen going right. I'll move this stuff out of the way, and we'll just, well, I moved it right in the way, didn't I? It's one of my favorite little cutaways. Here I have a little NGK spark plug here. And it doesn't tell me the spark plug number, but I can flip it over. I can see that the outer shell, the ceramic part that is supposed to direct the electricity down to the center of the plug. Of course, there's different sizes of sockets that fit on these, different thread pitches and lengths of the threads, right? Those are all part of the process of selecting the right plug. If I flip this over though, this guy's cut in half. And what I can see here is that this is a copper core. This is part of copper here. It's a copper core center electrode. So it lets all that electricity flow right through the plug to the center electrode and jump the gap between the center electrode and the ground electrode. There's different styles of plugs. There's resistor plugs. A resistor plug would have a little resistor pellet in there, and that would reduce radio frequency noise, which is important on like an automotive engine. There's platinum plugs. Platinum plugs are going to coat that center electrode in platinum so it lasts longer. There's double platinum plugs, where there's platinum on the center electrode, there's platinum on the ground electrode. And of course, we know there's split fire and all kinds of different spark plug designs, all aimed at trying to make the spark plug last longer, or maybe providing a hotter spark down here. And it's kind of mixed results. I have not really seen, and I've spent many hours on the dyno, both small engine dynos, automotive chassis dynos as well. I've had a hard time actually seeing differences between different spark plugs, other than in whether they're platinum or they're standard or they're split fires or they're not. But I have seen a difference in temperatures and the heat range of the spark plug. And definitely, if a spark plug is not providing spark, the engine will start to lose significant power. So anyways, I told you I'd give you a tech tip. And how do I cheat? Well, you can see the center electrode length here, right? And speaking about heat range, if I have an engine that when it was brand new and it ran great, it was supposed to run on a B, let's say a B8ES spark plug, pretty cold plug. And now the engine's getting low on compression. It keeps fouling out spark plugs. I might move down to a B7, maybe even a B6, kind of compensating for as the engine has lost compression due to the piston rings wearing. I'm going to try to keep the spark plug from fouling out as quickly by running a little bit hotter heat range of a plug. So you can kind of play with that based on what you think's going on with the engine. If I pump up an engine, let's say whether it's a 2-cycle, maybe I do some porting. I put a high flow expansion chamber exhaust on there. Or it's a 4-stroke cycle engine where I'm going to rev it up higher and I put on a different intake and exhaust, maybe different cams in there. Then I might go to a colder spark plug because I've improved the performance of the engine or I've increased its compression ratio. If I have an engine where it's losing compression, it's fouling out plugs, my way that I cheat is I'll go to a hotter heat range to try to see if I can keep that spark plug from fouling out so quickly. Obviously, keep in mind that that's kind of a Band-Aid effect at best, right? If I'm doing that, that generally means that I'm compensating for a worn engine, and it's only a matter of time before I have to rebuild it. So, all right. So we've gone all the way from, we started the day where we talked about diaphragm carburetors. We did a demonstration on 2-cycle engines and diagnosing case leaks. We've talked about governors quite a bit because I find those to be very confusing. In fact, the governor test is the one that students tend to have the most difficulty with passing that certification. And then we went into a little bit of intro of electrical by talking about spark plugs today. I have other videos and stuff for you guys that I've made on spark plugs and reading spark plugs. And next week, we'll talk more about the ignition systems and how do I get the spark to the plug, and also just small engine electrical systems in general. So hopefully that stuff made some sense to you. I was happy to have a couple of you guys join me today as we get going. We'll meet for class next week at 10 o'clock, and we'll try to wrap everything up and talk about that electrical stuff. I, of course, will give you some more electrical or some more small engine tips and tricks and things to look for diagnosis. And I've been really enjoying looking at your projects and stuff as you guys have been getting stuff done and submitted into me. And the folks that are still with us are doing a really good job. It seems like we lost some folks early on in the class, but those who've stayed with us are doing great. And so keep up the hard work. There's several things on your grade that you don't really get to see how it all comes together until we get closer to the due dates. But most everybody's doing pretty good. So keep doing your Briggs and Stratton certifications, your Still certifications, and keep those projects coming in as well. All right. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you, Professor French.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Hey, I had a couple questions.